Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thanks for sharing your time with us. We want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. Please check him out on the internet. He's a native storyteller, and he is an amazing man who tells amazing stories about history and cosmology that go back generations. It's an amazing way of keeping track of history, so check him out. Mark has an amazing guest also tonight, so I'm really looking forward to his show. There's a lot of great material that's going to be shared, so I hope you're like me and have sat back with your pencil and paper to take notes and be entertained and enlightened all at the same time. Mark, the show is all yours.
Okay. Hold my beer. I'll show you how you do this. How you doing?
Doing well. Doing well.
You and Solaris had a great show last night. Our guest
we did.
Is...
It was she's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, our guest tonight's been a guest with her too. So Gary knows her as well, and she's just really one of the best hosts out there. So.
She is. She is that.
Yeah, she is. We have another Ancient Aliens commentator joining us tonight. We'll be covering the Hopi from Arizona. You've probably figured out that our guest is Gary David. He is the author of the very insightful book on the Hopi culture, The Orion Zone. Gary's latest book is The Orion Dimension. We're going to be working out of a couple more of his historical publications too. Hopefully we get have enough time to get a little bit of a reading out of one book. We just have a lot of written material to get through tonight. And Gary's numerous books can be found on Amazon. One of the books we'll also be working from a little bit is Journey of the Serpent People. That's was printed just a couple years ago, but that's going to be another one we're going to be working out of. So I just want to bring on Gary. Hi Gary, how are you?
Hi Mark, glad to be here. Hi Barbara, good to be here. Great to talk to you.
We're glad to have you. I've never been to Arizona. You do a great job of creating descriptions of the land. You have wonderful photos in your book. So, for those of us who have not been to Arizona or have not read your book, let's just start off by looking at the geography first, and would be a good starting place. And I think we're going to be getting involved in putting all kinds of topographical features on top of your descriptions. So let's begin there.
Okay.
This is northern Arizona.
Arizona is a varied place, climatically and geographically, and it's so different in different parts of the state. In northern Arizona, you have around the Flagstaff area, you have 12,000 foot mountain that gets a lot of snow in the winter, and it snows many feet in the wintertime, and blizzards and that whole thing. But you come down to the lower deserts in the southern part of the state, where I am right now. I'm near Tucson, Arizona. And, like I was telling Mark and Barbara, today it was, 100 degrees today, and it's supposed to be 104 tomorrow. So, and it's not even May yet. So, Arizona can really be challenging, depending on where you're at. It gets cool at night, especially in the higher elevations, but very hot in the daytime. And, I guess what drew me to this place is the landscape itself, because you can look out and the land kind of telescopes outward as you look towards the horizon. You can see, if you're driving down the road, you can see forever. You can see the buttes and mesas in the distance, and some of your listeners might be familiar with Monument Valley, those spectacular buttes that are in the northern part of the state. So, it's just a varied landscape, and in this landscape, there are a number of Native American tribes. I concentrate mostly on the Hopi, though also the Zuni, which is in a pueblo in New Mexico. And there are different tribes. The Navajo also live in Arizona and New Mexico. So there are different tribes. A lot of Native influence in this state. The Tohono O'odham live in the southern part of the state. They used to call it the Papago people. So it's an amazing mixture of Native American peoples who were here thousands of years ago, and kind of shaped the legends and mythology of this place according to the land, because the land is it's in Native American religion. Land is key, is paramount to understanding the Creator or the Great Spirit, or whatever you want to call it. The land is very important. If you don't have the land, you don't have anything, according to Native American religion. And so it's been I've been here since 1994 with my family. We moved down from South Dakota, which is another place with a lot of Native American influence. Maybe I should go back that far, because really my whole thrust of my work began in South Dakota. I was working with the Lakota Sioux, which lives in the mostly the western part of South Dakota, and I was teaching on Pine Ridge Reservation. I'm teaching English, and also on the Rosebud Reservation, and I was teaching at Oglala Lakota College, and just kind of studying that culture, Lakota culture, and going to some of the ceremonies, the Sundance, and participating in sweat lodges and things like that, pipe ceremonies. So a sacred pipe I'm talking about, So, I happened to meet with a woman named Charlotte Black Elk, And Charlotte Black Elk was the great-granddaughter of Nicholas Black Elk, which Black Elk wrote a famous classic of American literature called Black Elk Speaks. And he wrote this with the help of the poet, Nebraska poet, John G. Neihart. And it talks about he was a late 19th century, early 20th century medicine man who lived and prayed in South Dakota. And I met his great-granddaughter. And she, at the time, she was talking about a map that she had on a buffalo hide. And the Black Hills is the center. They are the center of Lakota cosmology. The Black Hills is the center of the world, according to Lakota. Harney Peak, we call it Black Elk Peak. It's been officially named Black Elk Peak now. But it's the highest point in South Dakota. It's 7,242 feet. And it's the highest point east of the Rockies and west of the Pyrenees in Europe. So that's basically the highest mountain. The first high mountain you come to are the Black Hills. And the Lakota had kind of a whole mythology built around this place, the Black Hills. And they conceived the Black Hills as a great terrestrial buffalo. And they would go around and do ceremonies at certain times of the year. And they do a special ceremony at one place, and then they migrate to another place. And they kind of make a big circle around the Black Hills and also inside of the Black Hills. One of the places that they did a Sundance ceremony, the major summer ceremony, is a Devil's Tower, which, of course, was made famous by the Close Encounters of the Third Kind movie. So, it had a special meaning, this whole landscape there, and they conceptualized it as a great buffalo. But also using the maxim "as above, so below," they also conceived a great constellation that mirrored the Black Hills. So the Black Hills mirrored this constellation, and the constellation was comprised of Orion and the Pleiades and Canis Major. So they saw the belt stars of Orion, for instance, as a backbone of this great celestial buffalo, and the nose of this buffalo would be the Pleiades in the constellation Taurus. The tail of this buffalo would be Sirius, which is the brightest star in the heavens, and in Canis Major. So they had this as above, so below concept, and that's the first time I had come across this concept of the Earth mirroring the sky, or the conceptualization, the cosmology that these native peoples built up through the ages. That it mirrored the heavens, and the star people are said to have come down from the heavens, and they were the ancestors and the teachers. The star ancestors came down from these places, mainly Orion. I'll get into this in greater detail when I talk about the Hopi of Arizona. But that planted in my mind this idea of as above, so below. So when I moved down to Arizona in 1994, my family and I rented a big yellow truck and put all our stuff in our truck and just drove south. We didn't really know where we were going to end up, but we managed to come to northern Arizona. Something drew us here to northern Arizona, and we've been here ever since in the state of Arizona. And I started going to the Hopi reservation which is in the northern part of the state. The Hopi, I should describe the Hopi, they are basically farmers. They were traditionally agrarian people that they were dry farmers, in fact. They didn't use much irrigation. They use a little bit of like the dams. They make little dams, check dams, and so forth. But they didn't do any major irrigating. They depended mostly on runoff of the winter rains and the summer rains. And the Hopi live on three primary mesas in northern Arizona. They call it first, second, and third mesa. And there are about a dozen villages, separate villages, both at the base of these mesas and on top of the mesas. And they live in these, I called them pueblos before, and these are, a pueblo is basically a stone apartment complex, an ancient stone apartment complex, and that the Hopi built. They would, they built these all over Arizona, but mainly in this center place. They saw this as the center of the world, much like the Lakota in South Dakota would conceptualize the center of the world, the sacred center of the world, as Harney Peak in the Black Hills. The Hopi see these three mesas as their center. They were drawn to this place. And they were drawn, it's kind of interesting the way they came together, because they came from different directions. The Hopi migrated in different clans, and they migrated from different directions. Some came up from the south, others came from the east, some came down from the north, and of course from the west, and they all came together at this center place. So, it's amazing, and the Hopi still are have these clans and that are active. The Hopi also continue to do their ceremonies, although it's getting kind of shaky right now. I'll talk about maybe a little bit about prophecy and the end of the current world, but
okay.
Yeah, but the Hopi still do these ceremonies, these Kachina dances. Some of your listeners might be familiar with the Kachina dolls that the Hopi have carved. These are masked dolls, and the Kachinas, when they dance in the village plaza, and they start about this time of year, about in full force around March or April. They start dancing in the plazas with these masks, and the masks are of different sorts. They're wooden masks carved out of cottonwood, and they're painted in various colors, and it's hard to describe them because they're so multifaceted. They're just if you Google Kachinas, you can see just a wide array of these bizarre-looking creatures, that you wouldn't expect. Some of them are not naturalistic at all. Some of them are. Some of them are in the shape of an eagle or a bear or something like that. But others, they look like they're wearing space helmets. They actually look like they're extraterrestrials. And it's a very bizarre thing that they dance in the plaza, and they dance from sundown to sun up to sundown all day long in the hot Arizona sun. And the drone of the single drum, and they dance around in a circle within the plaza. And it's for me, it's like they're pressing their prayers with their feet into the earth and sending their prayers into the earth to get this earth energy, and so the corn will grow, and the Hopi traditionally grew corn, beans, and squash, kind of the triad of culture. And the corn was imported from Mexico, so perhaps some of the Hopi clans from Mexico came up and introduced corn to this region. But the corn has been grown in Mexico and Central America for thousands of years, and the Hopi still grow corn and beans and squash, and some watermelon and things like that. But they still carry on the tradition of this agricultural tradition and the ceremonial tradition in the same way. So it's a culture that's kind of on the edge right now, as a lot of Native American cultures are, because we're being bombarded by the mainstream world, the main culture, and the economic prospects on reservations are very, very poor. A lot of alcoholism and even drug abuse in more recent years. But it's kind of a sad devolution of a great tradition. But this is all part of the Hopi way of looking at worlds in cycles. Much like the Maya of Central America and Yucatan region. The Hopi saw time as cyclic, and they considered that we're now living in the fourth world, really at the end of the fourth world. And they have a lot of prophetic signs that show this and that talk about this. But, we've lived through destruction of the first world, the destruction of the second world by various means, and the destruction of the third world also. And they think that very, very soon that we're going to go into the fifth world. We're going to transition into the fifth world. So this time might be the portal. It might be the portal because there are so many things coming together at this particular time. In 2020, in particular, the world has turned upside down in the last month, and
yes.
We're just trying to survive psychologically and physically, and just trying to stay sane during this time of great uncertainty and great social unrest and chaos. And the Hopi in their prophecies, they went down into Kivas and saw much. They foretold much of what is happening now. Not only the social chaos, but also the environmental degradation that's going on all over the world. The massive forest fires recently in Australia. 1 billion animals perished during that time, and you just see just kind of the world is devolving. The time is kind of playing itself out, and the Hopi knew about this and said that we have some very difficult times to go through, but we will make it. We will make it into the fifth world. That's the world of peace and greater understanding and greater spiritual awakening amongst all peoples. So they do believe that we're going to be there, but it's going to be a hard time that we seem to be going through right now.
Yeah, Gary, as we keep going through tonight's show, in your writings, it seems like maybe the third world has a lot of importance to our discussion. We're in the fourth world now. There's transition to the fifth world soon, and when you are writing about the structure, you just mentioned like for example the kivas. Are these kivas where these stories are enacted as a ritual for observers? You're talking about. You did talk about how these different dances. It seems like they're very symbolic dances. Getting their feet planted in the soil. Okay, that makes sense. Being connected to the earth. But are some of these structures in Arizona, like the kiva, is that where a lot of the learning takes place?
Yeah, exactly. Good point. That the kiva is basically an underground or semi-underground prayer chamber, and you enter a kiva from above through a ladder in the roof of the kiva, and you go down, and it's as if you're going from the fourth world into the third world as you descend the ladder. And a lot of the learning, especially in the winter time, when the non-agricultural time, when people are kind of bound to their houses, so they go down into the kiva, and they tell these stories. They tell a lot of the stories, and they retell the myths that happened in the early times. So they tell these for the young people mainly, so the young people will know these myths and will carry this tradition onward. So this is the main learning time is the winter time. When the spring comes, and from spring until harvest time, they're out and doing practical things of growing corn, beans, and squash, and doing that sort of thing. And doing their dances, the Kachina dances last from, like I said, March or April in the plaza until July, just after the summer solstice. In July, they have the last dance called the home dance. Now, the home dance means the home-going dance. And these particular kachinas, they're beautiful kachinas that have these huge, they call them tablitas, these crests on their head, painted in brilliantly colored paint, kind of stepped wooden, tableaus, I guess you could say. And they have these on their head, and they dance around. There's a beautiful dance, and this is the last dance of the season. And the Kachinas then leave and go back to the San Francisco Peaks, which is southwest of the Hopi Mesas. So the Kachinas live for half the year on the San Francisco Peaks, which are the highest mountains in Arizona. And then after the winter solstice, they start to go back to the mesas, and they're there through February and then March. And like I said, they start the Kachina dance again in March. But there's a cycle of living in the mesas. These spirits, these messenger spirits, live for half the year on the mesas, and they help the agricultural process. They help the Hopi spiritually with their process of growing the corn, basically corn. And then after the monsoon season hits in around July, they go back to these high peaks, and they hover around the peaks all winter long, and through the winter solstice, and then they go back to the mesas. So there's this constant flow of spiritual energy from the high peaks to the Hopi mesas. So, but you're right about the kivas. It's the kivas on the Hopi reservation are primarily rectangular. Now, kivas in the past, for some of the very ancient kivas, were round kivas. So you will find kivas, some round kivas in places like the famous Chaco Canyon, the great city in Pueblo City in New Mexico, that have these multiple round kivas. I think the difference between that is the plaza, the rectangular plaza, began to play a greater part in the spiritual well-being of the people. That rectangular plaza, they dance in it. So I think the kivas kind of mirrored that rectangular shape rather than the round shape that they originally were. And I'm talking as far as the time span. I'm talking, Chaco Canyon, which I can talk about in terms of my map. But Chaco Canyon basically was started in like 850 A.D. This great city. It's a very large apartment complexes. One complex in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, had 800 rooms called Pueblo Bonito, and wow. It was the largest structure in America until like the 1880s, when New York built a bigger apartment building. But it was the largest structure in North America, until 1880. And it's just a massive place. You go out there and there's, I don't like to use this term in the middle of nowhere, because there's always somewhere in nowhere. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, it's always beautiful in nowhere, in the middle of nowhere. It can be the most beautiful place on the earth. And this is just an amazing basin, the San Juan Basin that Chaco Canyon is located in. It's just an amazing place that these great stone buildings just come out of nowhere if you approach them, and you wondered why they were living in this place. There wasn't a regular stream, intermittent water flow. They caught water that came off the cliff sides of this canyon. And you just wonder why they would pick this particular place to settle and build such a massive complex of structures with kivas, the round kivas, and they had what's called great kivas, which were very large and kind of would hold large ceremonies in these great kivas. And you can go to these today and see what the kiva look like. There's a place a little north of Chaco Canyon called Aztec National Monument. It's a restored great kiva, and it's just beautiful because you can see what this massive, huge beams that held the roof of this great kiva. This massive, 3 feet across, these pine beams, and they had to. In the case of Chaco Canyon, they had to transport these beams more than 60 miles from the nearest forest. So they transported all these beams, over 200,000 beams, make up the buildings in Chaco Canyon. And these were basically the ancestors of the current Hopi who are living in Arizona now. But they lived in New Mexico at one point, and they migrated around the Southwest quite a bit.
And Gary, you just mentioned about somewhere around 850 A.D. This Chaco Canyon apartment complex was built. It's the biggest apartment complex for in America for the next about 1,000 years. You're just talking about the trade routes, to get the wood, basically like 2x4s to the building site.
They were larger than 2x4s. They were like 6x6s. They were big logs. They huge logs that they transported, just on foot. And it's kind of funny because Chaco Canyon, if your listeners ever get a chance after this is all over to travel out to New Mexico and go to this place, Chaco Canyon, it's just amazing because there are these people living there starting in 850, and they lived there until about 1140 AD. Okay, so they lived there quite a few centuries and built various pueblos and then abandoned some and built others in this canyon. But they also built these roads. They had this road system going like 50 miles to the north, and these roads were like 30 feet wide, and some had berms on them, and they went arrow straight north and south.
Wow.
And, why would a culture that didn't have the wheel or wagons of any sort, why would they need these roads going arrow straight north and south for many, many miles? Perhaps it was a pilgrimage route that the people from the north came down into this sacred city at the center. So this is another what's called axis of the world, or axis mundi, a center of the world. The Chaco was definitely a center of the world for its time, and people, from the north came down to there to participate in the ceremonies, and they came up from the south to participate at this sacred city in New Mexico. So, and they brought, they imported pottery and so forth, and also Chaco Canyon was a big turquoise center. They mined turquoise not too far away in a little south of Santa Fe. There was a huge turquoise mine, the present-day Santa Fe, I should say. And they got a lot of turquoise, and they took it to Chaco Canyon, and then they traded it to the south. And these trade routes went down into Central America and into southern Mexico and into Maya territory. So the Hopi and the Maya were definitely connected trade-wise. And, the Hopi, the ancestral Hopi, brought the turquoise down into this region. And one of the things that they brought up from the Maya territory were these scarlet macaws, these brilliantly colored birds, and they found archaeologists have found feathers and even whole birds in burial sites in Chaco Canyon and other sites around Arizona and New Mexico. So they found these birds were transported from the jungles like 1,200 miles away. On the backs of these traders in cages. They brought these live birds up into this region, and they might have represented fertility and rainfall, and something along that nature, because they were such a lush jungle bird that they might have spiritually represented a certain element that the Hopi needed for their existence, which is rainfall. Rainfall is crucial in the desert here because they do these kachina dances mostly to bring the rainfall, to help the crops. And this is one of the ways that perhaps spurred this cycle, the spiritual cycle of rainfall, was to bring to import the birds into Chaco Canyon and other sites in Arizona.
Yeah, Gary, if the readers or the listeners go out and get a copy of your the Orion Zone, you do cover the different social organizations within the Hopi nation. You do talk about the Parrot Clan. That's going to feature into our discussion of your the Orion dimension, but these trade routes, from what's now New Mexico into Arizona, then going south into Mexico, Central America. This is really interesting about how extensive the trade networks were throughout the North American continent, and even talk at the start of the show how in the Black Hills, Orion, the Pleiades, Canis Major, all fit into the cosmology of the Lakota, getting Orion. It's similar ideas in Arizona. There's a huge space in between there, but you get the same religious, spiritual concepts across a huge expanse of America. And as we get into the second half of the show, we're probably going to hear more about. This seems almost a global concept. It's just very interesting, and the parrots aren't indigenous to North America.
I was amazed to see a parrot dance, a Kachina dance, the parrot dance on Third Mesa one time. And it just blew me away that there's these parrots dancing around in the dry desert, and I just wouldn't expect it, but that's part of the tradition of their trade routes to the south. And but maybe I should describe how I came across the major thrust of my work, beginning with the Orion Zone. I'd have to go back to 1997. I'd been living here in Arizona for a few years, and it was it was May. I think it was May of 1997, and I was driving up to the Hopi reservation, and driving along these arrow straight roads, north from Winslow, Arizona, and standing on the corner of Winslow, Arizona, there's also a statue there, right? And you can see a guy standing on in Winslow, but that's one of the ways to get up to the reservation. But I was driving along and kind of spacing out. Driving these vast distances and seeing mesas on the horizon. And I had just read the book by Robert Duvall called The Orion Mystery. And this book basically posits that the three pyramids on the Giza Plateau correspond to the belt stars of Orion. And as I said before, the Hopi live on three primary mesas in northern Arizona. And I was just kind of daydreaming, and I thought, well, maybe there's an Orion correlation, kind of like the Egyptian one, here in Arizona, because you have these three mesas. So, I just put that in the back of my mind and drove up to the mesas and went to the dances and watched the Kachinas dance. And then when I got back home, I remembered what I thought about, and I took out a sky chart, and I took out a map of Arizona, and I found, what I found just amazed me, because not only did the three primary mesas, first, second, and third mesa, correspond to the belt stars of Orion, but there was an ancient ruin site or village corresponding to each major star in the constellation Orion. And, there was a one-to-one correspondence between the pattern that was laid out on the Arizona desert and the pattern of the Orion constellation in the sky. So this is a direct correlation between the two, but as above, so below. So, the Hopi somehow, in their wisdom consisting of star ancestors coming from Orion, perhaps, and from the Pleiades as well. Their ancestors came down in the form of these kachinas, and they taught them how to make this template, this pattern on the Arizona desert, as far as where to build their particular villages. Unfortunately, I told you before that my website was just recently hacked, because there's a whole page on there of all these maps that show exactly, what I'm talking about. It's hard to conceptualize it unless you get a visual picture of it. But you can, unfortunately, I'll try to get my website going, but you can see this in particularly starting with the Orion zone, which I published in 2006. You can see these maps that show, the relationship between the particular stars and the villages, the ancient villages that the Hopi built around, starting about 1050 AD and ending in about 1300 AD. And so, the Hopi migrated in this particular area and built villages and then abandoned villages and moved on to another place. And they were instructed by their star ancestors where to build these particular villages.
Okay, so on top of three mesas in the major Hopi core, there are these villages on top of the mesas that mirror Orion's belt, which is similar to what we see at the Giza Plateau and at other pyramid locations in Mexico and Central America, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The mesas are very much like a pyramid. If you look at a mesa, like a flat top pyramid that you see in the Mayan territory, and I think that the Hopi selected this because perhaps they saw the pyramids down in Central America and Yucatan, and they wanted to settle in a place that was similar. And these mesas, some of these mesas look very much like a flat top pyramid. And they built villages on top and at the base. And, some are abandoned villages. I've early on when I was going up to the reservation, I went to the base of Second Mesa, and I stumbled across an abandoned village that they weren't living in. And it was kind of spooky because I drove my pickup truck down the road, and I was just kind of walking around this abandoned, a ruined village with, the blocks all scattered across the ground. And, I heard a voice in my head say, "You better get out of there," So I think the spirits of that particular place were warning me, this is not a good place to be. So I should really take my truck and turn around and go back whence I came, So that was, the spirits are real there, and the spiritual energy is so strong there, and the spirits of the ancestors are there, and and inform the people on a daily basis. It's not like they're in some isolated heaven, very far above us. They come in the form of rainfall. The Hopi conceptualize their ancestors as living in the clouds, and they come down as rainfall, and they visit the people, and then they go back up. So, the ancestors are always very close, informing them of the way to live their life, the way to live a peaceful life. Because the Hopi are considered the people of peace. They have never been conquered by the U.S. government, such as the Lakota Sioux. You heard about the warfare between the Lakota and General Custer and these people. Mm-hmm. And this, by the way, is in my book. My book of poetry just released. Voices of Inland Island, it's called. It's on Amazon if you want to check it out. This is all about the Lakota and the history of the Lakota and the struggle with the encroaching frontier and the encroaching manifest destiny of settlement in the West and the gold rush and all that stuff, and then culminating at Wounded Knee, the massacre at Wounded Knee, which in 1890. So that's what that's all about. But the Hopi were never really conquered by the their families were torn apart and sent to boarding schools. They shipped some of the children off to boarding schools in terrible conditions that they had to disavow their language and customs and culture and essentially try to become white people. Kind of exterminate the spiritual aspect of the Indian in order to so they could assimilate. And I just read in the paper that a politician, which I won't name, said that the trouble with the Native Americans is they haven't learned to assimilate into the white culture, which is just absurd.
Yeah, and Gary, you said that the Hopi were the least. They were very peaceful people, but they were also the least affected by manifest destiny. So very traditional, and they've been able to preserve their culture relatively intact. Now with these villages on top of the mesas, have the Hopi built like a community neighborhood over the hill from the? Are they still occupying the area at the base of the mesas?
Yeah, it's a kind of a mixed bag because some of the villages are more traditional. Like the village of Walpi on First Mesa, there was no electricity or running water there. And a couple of villages are like that, but some of the villages have let in electricity and running water. So, it's kind of a mixed, depending on what village it is. And the villages are more or less autonomous. They're run by the head elders, the head medicine men, run these villages. and the villages have different traditions, really. So it's really hard to generalize about talking about the Hopi, because some of the villages have certain mythologies and certain traditions that the other villages don't. Like I said before, they came up from different places, and they came to the center place, led by a god named Masao. Masao. Maybe I should talk about Masao. He's a strange creature that, and I have a kind of an artist's rendition in a few of my books that describe. There's been a lot said about Masao in the oral tradition, been written down. What Masao looks like. He's described as very tall and kind of a thin body, and he has a large bulbous head and round eyes and a round mouth. And Masao is basically the god of the underworld, the god of death, the god of fire, and the god of this earth plane. There's one myth that says that the Hopi came up out of the Grand Canyon, came up through a hollow bamboo reed and climbed up out of Grand Canyon and began to populate the Colorado Plateau in northern Arizona and New Mexico. And this god Masao was the first creature or entity that the Hopi who were migrating around met. And Masao said that if you want to live simply like I do, with my sack of seeds and my digging stick, you can stay here, and I will give you the deed to this particular land. So Masao was not only an underworld god, but also a god of the earth plane, as lived by the Hopi. And I believe that Masao, as well as the Kachinas, directed the Hopi where to build these villages to present this pattern of Orion in the heavens, on the earth. Present this pattern, reflected, this mirroring of Orion on the earth. Much like the Lakota, they conceptualized the Black Hills as a great buffalo, with the belt being the belt stars of Orion being its backbone. There's same kind of correlation, as above, so below. So.
Right, and Gary, you do have photos in the Orion zone on page 50 and 76 about the information on page 76 about the petroglyphs. The one on page 50 is of Masao. Is the petroglyph information that you include in the Orion zone, are they found nearby these three mesas that represent Orion's belt, or in the general vicinity?
They're basically all over Arizona, these petroglyphs.
Okay.
I found a lot of the petroglyphs are around the Winslow area, believe it or not. There's a place called Homoloby State Park, which is one of these stars of the Orion correlation, the Arizona Orion correlation. It corresponds to Betelgeuse in the whole template. And like I say, I wish I had my website working, and you could go to the map and say, "Oh yes, I see what you mean." But you can look in the Orion zone, and there are maps there, and in a couple of the other books that you can see. Each site, like I say, Homoloby has a lot of petroglyphs around that area, and I also found star map of the different constellations, Orion and Auriga and Taurus and Canis Major and Gemini, all carved into the side of the cliff. And I show this in my book, The Orion Zone, as well. That they wanted a map of this whole as above, so below, and they wanted to show where they were located on the map, 3 Hopi mesas. They wanted to show that. So you can see this petroglyph evidence of the way they were thinking and their mythology. And it's just fascinating, as well as the archaeology that you have pottery and you have stone structures that you can study. You can also study the petroglyphs, the rock carvings, and sometimes rock paintings of these ancient people, and they're all over Arizona, basically, and New Mexico as well. That's their way of talking about their migrations, talking about the different clans that were in the area, talking about the spiritual aspects of certain beings. And you see a lot of, for instance, spirals, and the spiral can be associated with a kind of a portal or an interdimensional portal into the spirit world. So, it's just a fascinating subject in and of itself, just the petroglyphs and the pictographs that you find in this region that correspond with their mythology and the way they view the world and the different cycles, the cyclic view of time.
And Gary, you were talking about Chaco Canyon was founded about roughly 850 AD. A lot of the information that you've been talking about, the Hopi information, the Hopi culture in northern Arizona, that information you presented covered what you're talking about. About 1100 to 1300. It's interesting that you do mention that about 1300 these mesas seem to be suddenly abandoned because of too much prosperity. That's some pretty interesting. But the point is, in a relatively short period of time, the Hopi in northern Arizona really did accomplish some engineering marvels. We're going to start getting into more of what we know about some of their folklore, but they came from somewhere else and settled there and achieved left their mark with astonishing achievements. But in your the Orion dimension, you're saying that they use Google Earth to show that there are, aside from the 3 Orion belt mesas, there are a lot of other structures that are in a straight line. You use a photo from Google Earth that it's like the chakra line that's going way out through the desert and keeps going out into the ocean, and
right.
that's one of your premises.
Before we get into that, which is really, really far afield, and I will get into it because it's one of the focuses of the new book. I should say that the Hopi have, built these structures, these pueblos, starting in like 1000, 1100, in the Three Mesa area, Three Mesas. But they've been in this region for thousands of years, and they migrated around, and they lived mostly in what is called pit houses, or subterranean structures that are single family structures or single clan, perhaps, that they lived kind of more spread out, kind of like what the Navajo lived spread out. The Navajo came into this region from the north, and they currently live spread out. They don't live in these villages like the Hopi do. The Navajo live in separate, kind of spread out communities, and they have what's called a hogan, their sacred house, out, it's more spread out than the Hopi. And the Navajo reservation completely surrounds station in Arizona. And the Navajo also goes into western New Mexico as well. But I should say, stress the point that the Hopi were migrating around the whole continent. And I talk about this a lot in my book, Journey of the Serpent People, the migrations of the Hopi. Because the Hopi, when they first met this god, Masao, he said, well, you can stay here, but first you've got to go on this great migration to the 4 different directions. And they conceptualized these 4 directions with a reverse swastika, and the swastika is very old. It's a very old symbol. It's from India, and a friend of mine sent me an ancient swimming pool in the shape of a swastika, and these are from southern India, but it's really all over the world, the swastika. And the Hopi also paint the swastika on their dance rattles. So when they're doing the Kachina dance, they'll be in their right hand, they'll have a brightly colored rattle with a swastika on it, kind of a stylized swastika. And this has been used for thousands of years. I saw in some of my research some pottery with that was done in the Phoenix Basin area, the people there, which incidentally were called the Hohokam, a different, slightly different group. But that they also had the swastika symbol on this pottery. So the people were moving around to the 4 directions, to the 4 winds, you can say. And I talk about the Hopi, especially the Snake Clan, in my book Journey of the Serpent People. They moved from this area, and they went east. They went all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And a few years ago, I gave a talk at Serpent Mound in southern Ohio. And I talked about the Hopi Snake Clan and their influence on the construction of Serpent Mound. There are a lot of similarities between the Hopi Snake Clan and elements of Serpent Mound. So the Hopi say that they came east, went to the Atlantic, and then lived in the Ohio Valley for some time. And there's been some DNA evidence to link southern Ohio, for instance, the Hopewell people of southern, which have nothing to do with the Hopi people of Arizona, of Hopewell of Ohio. Some of their DNA is very similar to that of the DNA found around Pyramid Lake in Nevada, and the ancestral Hopi were migrated all over Nevada as well as Arizona. So they went east to to the Atlantic Ocean and helped to build the Serpent Mound, or at least conceptualize the Serpent Mound.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say before, they went quite a bit south into the Maya territory, and some believe they went all the way into South America and interacted with the tribes of South America as well.
And Gary, since you're just talking about the Hopewell, you should probably talk about the importance of Dr. Lisa Mills's mitochondrial DNA, because that is a published, her published doctoral thesis.
It's her PhD thesis that's you can find it on the internet, and this she said that some of these Hopewell DNA sequences are very much like that found around the Pyramid Lake area in Nevada. So this is thousands of miles apart. So there was interaction between these two places, and that shows that they were migrating more than mainstream academics give them credit for. The mainstream academia tends to be very conservative, kind of. They're a conservative bunch that don't like to go out on a limb very much. They don't like to speculate that much. They want to stick with their pot shards and their ruined structures and their digs and so forth, which is helpful, and it gives us a lot of insight into how the people lived and the lifestyle of the people. But it doesn't really address the underlying spiritual and mythological side of the people, which, really, if you don't have the spiritual or legendary side of the people, then you're missing a whole part of the story. And that's why I think the mainstream should be a little more open to interpretations that deal with shamanism and deal with the sacred and deal with medicine men and deal with the spiritual aspects of the people, but which are really paramount in the life of the people. Even though the people are very practical and pragmatic, and they're funny and they're just like human beings, like any of us, but they also have this underlying spirituality that informs their daily life, unlike the secular world that a lot of us live in now. But I was going to finish my story about the four directions. They also went up into Canada, believe it or not. They found rock paintings up in Alberta, Canada. So the Snake Clan went up into Alberta, Canada, and interacted with the First Nations people up there. So the Hopi really got around all over, and then they finally came back to the center places. They call it Tuwanasabi, the center of the world, the center of where the three mesas are. Masao said you got to go on this long migration before you can come back here and live. So they spent many generations, I think, going across the land and going to different places before they came back. And so it's a complex thing that has many roots and many branches, and it's made more complex by the fact that some of the villages don't acknowledge certain aspects where other villages do. So it's hard to talk generally about the Hopi. For instance, the third mesa, which is the mesa to the left or to the west, the furthest west mesa, they have these ideas of these ocean-going trips, going across the ocean on bamboo reeds, going from island to island, from west to east, and going somewhere in the Western Pacific or the Southern Pacific, and going across the ocean until they made it to the western coast of America, either Central America or in North America. It's my belief that they got on the equatorial countercurrents, which is north and south of the equator, and they kind of rode these currents going from west to east, and landed up around Panama, and then they went north along the coast until they came to along the coast of South America and Mexico, and then they went up the Colorado River and into the Grand Canyon, and they came up into Arizona that way. So it's a very long voyage, and it's amazing to think that these desert farmers were once great mariners. They made these voyages across the ocean, and the idea of the continent, the lost continent of Mu, which I understand you had James Churchward recently talking about his work about that, and his great grandfather.
Go ahead. We had Jack on. He Barbara, what would you say? He slightly exaggerated, or he said his great grandfather slightly exaggerated the truth of
well, I think you're putting
legend.
It gently. I think you're putting it gently.
But
he called it a nasty word, actually.
but there is, Gary, I think you do make some interesting points that do give us another perspective on Colonel Churchward's writings on Mu and Jack's presentation. It is like for example, Colonel Churchward spoke about the variety of nationalities living across the Pacific, and then even throw in like the Hobbit people. That's some pretty interesting information right there. But Churchward.
I've got a lot from Churchward. Reading his books, and I've written a few chapters about Churchward and how they relate to the Hopi way of thinking about coming across the ocean and perhaps living on this great continent. This continent that was deluged, and I should mention that the destruction of the Hopi third world. We're in the fourth world now, but the Hopi third world was destroyed by a great flood. Of course, there were flood myths all over the world, but they believe that a great flood came across upon the continent and completely submerged it, and the Hopi had to flee from this place. So that's they got on these reed boats, and they have the bamboo or reed clan, or they're also called the houseboat clan. Even today in Hopi, it's called a number of things. It's called the water clan. The word is Patki, a water clan, the houseboat clan, and there's also a reed clan or bamboo clan. So, this idea of all this maritime references to these desert farmers is rather interesting, I think.
Yeah.
That that's something in their past, and they, like I said, they claim, especially on this one village of Orion is the main village there on Third Mesa. They claim that they came across the ocean, and like I say, I have a map in my book that shows these currents that kind of extends and it kind of hits where Panama is now. And it's interesting that far as DNA goes, I should say, that the trait of albinism, that's one thing I focus on in Journey of the Serpent People. The trait of albinism is very, very strong in the Hopi tribe, but it's also strong in the Kuna tribe of Panama. So there's and albinism is also very, very prevalent in the Western Pacific, the islands of the Western Pacific. So, they perhaps carried this trait from the Western Pacific over into Panama and up to the Hopi, and a couple of the tribes in New Mexico along the Rio Grande also have very strong albinism trait in them. So, these genetic things are kind of dovetailing with their legends and their myths about interocean travel of going across the Pacific.
Gary, that it really doesn't sound. What you just said. Some people might say, that might sound a little out there, but even in when Squire and Davis wrote their 1848, like the ancient monuments in the Mississippi Valley, they talk about some of the skulls, and Colonel Norris even talks about from the Charleston, West Virginia excavations, that some of the skulls look like the Peruvian skulls.
The elongated skulls.
Even in the 19th century, people are noticing what you're saying. Oh, okay, kind of like what we're finding in a few of these graves in Central America. Same thing we find in the Ohio Valley. And
then,
we get back to Lisa's.
There have been a lot of research
DNA.
Of people like Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira have a great book on giants and all the of North America. So there's a lot of evidence for at least 7-foot plus skeletons in the Ohio Valley region and into West Virginia and farther south even. So that's a line of research that a lot of people are following, and it's an interesting, and it's been a cover up from the Smithsonian, of course. But just like
Gary,
they tried to cover up. Yep, go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I was just going to say, your information just seems to back up what was noted by the Smithsonian researchers 160 years ago, and also draw our attention to the linguistics as well from around the world. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about introduce this more evidence of long distance migrations of these prehistoric peoples?
Well, I think there was a global civilization prior to the destruction of the first world, which the Hopi believe that the first world was destroyed by fire. And if you followed Graham Hancock and his books about the cometary impact, 10,800 BC, hit North America and just wiped out a lot of the fauna of the region and the people. The Hopi would call this the destruction of the first world by fire. And, of course, the second world was destroyed by ice, the Hopi believe. And, it's all because the humans devolved spiritually and just kind of a spiritual devolution, and things got chaotic and socially discordant, much like we're seeing today. Much like the signs of nearing the end of the fourth world. You can see it everywhere, and but the Hopi, have gone through the destruction of the first world and the destruction of the second world by ice, the Younger Dryas period after the Great Cometary Impact. The Earth got very cold very fast, and just ice came across a lot of the region, and it was a mini ice age, for instance, and got very cold. And the way that the Hopi explained how they survived, how their ancestors survived, they were led by a certain star to a god named Sotugnang. Sotugnang was the sky god, and he came down from the heavens and directed them to these entities, which the Hopi call the ant people. Now, the ant people have, you can see it. I've seen pictographs and petroglyphs of ant people carved in the cliffs of Arizona and New Mexico, and you can see they actually look morphologically like ants. They kind of spindly bodies and thin arms, and but they're humanoid in the sense that they could stand upright. So they're kind of a cross between ants and people, but the Hopi call the ant. The word for ant is anu, and the word for friend is naki or nakwatsvani. So Anunnaki comes to mind. The ant friends took the Hopi into caverns during these two cataclysms: destruction of the first world by fire and destruction of the second world by ice. And they took them down into caverns and caves, subterranean passageways, and they taught them how to survive in these caves while the destruction was going on. And the Hopi still have a ceremony called the Powamo ceremony. It happens in February, and it's called the bean sprouting ceremony. And they sprout beans in these kivas, these underground kivas, just like they sprouted in the caves. That the ant people taught them how to sprout these beans in the caves to help them survive this time when they were subterranean. They had to live in a subterranean existence while this destruction was going on. So they finally, the destruction was over, and they came up and began the next world. They began the third world, and then that was flooded out, as I said. So we're into the fourth world now, and going headlong into chaos.
Yeah, and to take some of this information a little farther, you talk about the Sumerian word for smelting is like uru or something.
There are so many linguistic. It boggles my mind too, because I've written 7 books so far, and I can't remember what I said in which book. But one parallel that really sticks in my mind is the Egyptian Hopi parallel, linguistic parallel.
Yeah, it's a good one. Okay.
That the word Sahu means the stars of Orion, and the Hopi word Sohu means stars in general, but the most important constellation to the Hopi is Orion. And why this is true is because the Hopi, during their winter solstice ceremony, which is a sun ceremony basically, but they get down into the kiva around midnight, and when they see the constellation Orion overhead on December 21st, in the overhead hatchway, you remember I said that they enter through a ladder in the roof,
mm-hmm.
and they come down the ladder, and they can look up and see the sky, and they see Orion in this rectangular hatchway or the square hatchway. And that means to start the winter solstice ceremony on December 21st. And the Hopi could pretty much see, when the winter solstice ceremony was, because the sun would be the farthest south on the horizon. And, when the sun rises, the farthest south it will go during a year. They usually had a sun watching place where they could sit and watch it rise over a given butte on the horizon, and they knew, when the sun hit that butte, it would be the winter solstice time, and the sun would be what's called in the winter house. That's the way the Hopi put it, and the solstice basically means sun stands still. So the sun on December 21st, a couple days before and afterwards, it stays at the same place on the horizon, and it doesn't move. So, the sun is basically standing still. And then as the spring progresses, the sun moves farther north on the horizon each day until it goes to the vernal equinox. It rises due east at 90 degrees. And then it continues to rise north. And it goes, in Hopi territory, it goes about 60 degrees azimuth. But that's kind of a complicated thing to conceptualize without seeing the diagram there. But the Hopi knew exactly when the winter solstice was, when the sun was the farthest south, and they'd have the ceremony. It's very important, the most important ceremony, really. But it would be synchronized by the constellation Orion in the overhead hatchway. So that's why, and these for the ancient Egyptians, Orion was paramount because Orion represented Osiris, the soul of Osiris that would go into the heavens, and the idea was that the deceased would rise up and go to the constellation Orion in the heavens. So, but both the constellations, Orion and Sirius and the Pleiades and Taurus, are important for both cultures. But like I say, this linguistic thing about Sahu for the stars of Orion in Egyptian, and Sohu, and incidentally, the Egyptian language, the vowels are approximate. So, Sahu is just an approximation. So it might have been Sohu as well. So exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you also make a interesting tie-in with Orion's, the constellation Orion's physical characteristics, like the narrow waist and
mm-hmm.
the appearance of how an ant looks. It has a narrow waist. So
exactly.
Does that give us a little bit more connection between Earth and the stars?
Well, I think the idea of the ant people and the idea of the ancient Egyptians, in my books I have a picture of Akhenaten, the 18th dynasty pharaoh, around 1350 BC. I show a sculpture of him, or not a sculpture, but a carving of him, and juxtapose that to an African ant, and it's very, very similar. The body of Akhenaten is very similar to what an ant looks like, and even the abdomen. The pointed abdomen in this one. It's one picture of Akhenaten. You have a pointed, the artist somehow, put the lower part of Akhenaten's body as looking like an ant's abdomen. So it's a very strange, mixture of the ant, therianthrope, it's called, the mixture of human and animal creatures or insectoid creatures. And like I say, I've seen a lot of petroglyphs that have these, antenna on these upright standing entities. I don't know how I call them crypto creatures. They're an odd thing. They're kind of like the kachina, really. The kachinas, that these very bizarre creatures that don't seem naturalistic at all, and they seem like they come from the stars. The ant people, of course, have come from the underground, the underworld. And that's how the Hopi were able to survive in these caverns during these two cataclysms that destroyed the earth.
And you just mentioned artists, Hopi artists, and later in your the Orion dimension, you talk about the positive and negative handprints. I thought that was really interesting, since we've been talking a little bit about art. We mentioned the fascinating petroglyphs earlier in the show. Can you tell us a little bit about the symbology of the positive and negative handprints?
Sure. Yeah, they're found all over the Southwest. And one explanation is that it's basically a signature of the person who's doing the carving. They would put their own kind of handprint, and they carve it, or they sometimes paint it, depending on the medium they're using. So that's the way a lot of the mainstream archaeologists see it. But I found that there's a little bit more involved here, because if you look at, for instance, the Mississippian culture of the Southeast, they have this idea of the eye in the hand motif. The eye in the hand. They've carved these on slate slabs, and the eye in the palm of the hand, okay? And some believe that this eye in the hand is the Orion Nebula. Mm-hmm. So the preponderance of these handprints all over the Southwest might be a tribute to this motif of the eye in the hand. And really, this is found all over the world. The Berber tribe of North Africa has this, it's called the Hand of Fatima, or the Hamza, but it has the eye in the hand, and some scholars believe that this corresponds to the Orion Nebula, and that at least for the people of the southeastern United States, this is a kind of a portal into the spirit world, and you can only access it at a certain time of year. And you can access this right about now, in fact. And if anybody wants to try it, it's late April is when you have the heliacal setting of Orion. That means that if you're a star watcher, you go out after sunset and you see the Orion constellation kind of hovering on the western horizon, and it's just about to set. So in a few days, it will become invisible. But some scholars believe that this is the time when the soul would kind of make this journey in late April, when Orion was setting and just before it became invisible. And it becomes invisible for a period of 70 days, which incidentally is the same period as the mummification process in ancient Egypt. It does it 70 days. When you can see Orion again in early July, when he appears at dawn, that's the heliacal rising of Orion in July. In ancient Egypt, it used to come with the summer solstice. It coincide with that, but now it's in July. But some believe that this is a very special time. This is kind of a portal in which you can access the spirit world and a tunnel to the underworld, the soul. See this opportunity. It's interesting you mentioned the linguistic aspect. The Hopi word ma'at means hand, but ma'ata means to show or be revealed. And the Egyptian word ma'at means sight, vision, something seen, tableau. And Ma'at is represented by justice, order, and law. So, you have these similarities again between ancient Egypt and the ancient Hopi people. So, as I said, I think there was a global knowledge that was transported all over the world, and this knowledge, and people interacted. And, different cultures interacted at different times, much more than mainstream academia would care to they, as I said, they're kind of narrow in their perspective of what actually the ancient people could do. And this is kind of denigrates the abilities of these ancient people. Like they believe, the archaeologists believe, well, no, they couldn't have sailed across the Pacific. Well, this kind of denigrates the skills and ability of these ancient people.
Right.
Of course they could sail across. Thor Heyerdahl showed us they could sail across the ocean in a papyrus boat. He sailed 4,000 miles. He sailed 4,000 miles in like 2 months from Morocco to Barbados.
Saint Brendan did it in the 5th century.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. And there are a lot of Celtic people coming over, and you have the Celtic influence in the Northeast with America's Stonehenge and all that stuff. And they for sure came over here. Very early on, so and interacted with the native peoples, and the native peoples taught them things, and they received knowledge from these travelers as well. So, it was a global, a cosmopolitan world that that the people were living in very early on.
Yeah, we've had some other guests on that, where we've basically said the same thing, is America thousands of years ago really isn't any different than what it is today. With everyone in the world new is here, everyone's traveling to America, trading, getting married, finding spouses, and it's just the same thing as today. It just took a little longer to get here and different routes, but it is basically human behavior hasn't changed in a really long time.
Sure, yeah. There were explorers, ancient maritime people. That explored the world, especially before the great cataclysm of the comet hitting North America, before 10,800 BC. There must have been some kind of global culture that you find traces of it, and even Graham Hancock will say, it's hard to track down the evidence because there's only traces of this global civilization left. I run down some of that in my book. For instance, there's kind of a world axis that you can draw from one of the sites in Arizona called Canyon de Chelly. It's on an exact longitude line to Easter Island. And if you go northward from Canyon de Chelly, which is corresponds to Saif in my template, my Orion template. If you go over the North Pole and you go into India on this same line, you come to Mohenjo-Daro, which is a great city in ancient India. It flourished around 2500 BC or so. But the interesting thing about this is that scholars have found similarities between the script that they found on Easter Island called Rango and the Indus River script found in India on the Indus River, now in Pakistan. But a great similarity in the characters. They're kind of ideogrammic writing that it's not alphabet or of any kind, but kind of symbols, basic symbols. But these two areas that are literally halfway around the world from each other have almost the exact same writing or communication. And that's why I think there was a global culture that disseminated this information all over the world. And we can see traces of this today.
Yeah, I understood Jack's Churchward's point. Things might have been exaggerated by a family member a long time ago, there is some of that evidence that we could glean from a few places. A lot of it's buried under silt from floods and underwater, but there's still just those little bits of information that do appear that really make you wonder. I think there probably was some kind of global civilization, and introduced me to that one word, thalassocracy, a maritime trading empire. I like that. That was a new word I learned from your Orion dimension. It was a cool term. There's something to that too.
Oh yeah. The ancient people. It's the idea of diffusionism rather than isolationism. That people got around much more than academics give them credit for, and they diffused their culture all around the world in very early times. And I talk about Churchward, and I have found some useful things with Churchward. But I also talk in the Orion dimension. I also talk about Edgar Cayce. And Edgar Cayce, the famous prophet, he said that the people living in the Southwest came from across the ocean. They came, from across the sea, from the continent of Mu. And they settled in the American Southwest, and he called these the cliff dwellers. And that's the term that he used. And they were he said that they were the last wave of people from Mu before it was destroyed by a great flood. So And the Hopi also have this legend of, of a place called Petroglyphs, which is the Red City of the South. That's what they call it. And I found that Edgar Cayce, claimed that there was a lost hall of records in Yucatan. And some believe that, namely Greg and Laura Little and John Van Auken of the Edgar Cayce Foundation,
Right.
they believe that it was a place called Piedras Negras. It's a Mayan site on the Umacinta River in northwestern Guatemala. And I wrote about this, and I found that, this site is resembles a lot the way the Hopi described this place called Petroglyphs, the lost red city of the South. And they describe it in detail. And you look at the structure of this mine place. I haven't been to this place, and it's because it's very hard to get to. By the way, it's not on the normal tourist route, but it's been studied by archaeologists. But I found a lot of the similarities between Piedras Negras and the Petroglyphs, which the Hopi conceptualized as their kind of stepping off place before they came north and inhabited the American Southwest. So you can look at my book for all the details. There's so many details that it's hard to summarize the gist of what I'm talking about, because this book, The Orion Dimension, is very wide-ranging. I talk about a little bit about Lascaux, the ancient cave art of Lascaux, 15,000 years ago, and how there's an Orion depiction on one of the walls of Lascaux. It all has to do with Orion and the importance of Orion in the psyche of world cultures. And I try to reflect that. But, Orion is, like I say, in very important in ancient Egypt and also here in the Southwest, American Southwest. So that's been my focus, since basically I've been writing since 1997 about this. It took a few years to get out my first book, The Orion Zone, in 2006. But I've released 7 volumes that talk about the Hopi and their migrations and the different migrations around the world, in fact, and the diffusionism of different cultures. And I also talk about, the Lost Cave in Grand Canyon in one of my books, the Egyptian Lost Cave in Grand Canyon, which a lot of people have talked about.
Gary, we're down to approaching 6 minutes or so. Hey, did you want to read a poem or like from Voices of the Inland Island, or anything else you want to plug? You have is that one conference rescheduled? Just trying to wrap up any.
Oh, okay, yeah. The conference is it would have been great, a great conference, but of course COVID is co-opting it, and we're going to have a live stream on the 15th through the 17th of May. Okay, and the way you get to this live stream and get tickets for this live stream, I'm not sure exactly how much the tickets are. You'd have to talk to Robert Dakota, who is the organizer of this conference, which is turned into a live stream. But, people, a lot of, interesting people. Eric Von Daniken was supposed to be there. He'll be live streaming. Michael Cremo, Randall Carlson, Hugh Newman, Jim Vieira, Regina Meredith, and myself will be, doing live streams about our presentations that we were to give at this conference. It would have been a nice conference to meet the granddaddy of the UFO ancient astronaut theory, Eric von Daniken. But anyway, you can go to Worldviews Media. Now, it's spelled very specially because it's not an S, but it's a Z. Worldviewsmedia.com. Worldviews with a Z, media.com. And you can see a description of it, and it's unfortunate that this has come about because we really are in an unsure, chaotic place. But I think if you follow the Hopi, which I do, and have done for years, and if you follow their prophecy, we could do a whole show on prophecy, Hopi prophecy. But the thing that brought it together for me was seeing Prophecy Rock, which is a petroglyph on Third Mesa in Arizona, and it has a depiction of the way the world is going. And there are two oblique lines that are carved into the rock, and the lower oblique line going from downward to the upward, you see Hopi farmers tending corn, okay? And then parallel to that line, you see another line that is above that, and it kind of trails off into nowhere, okay? I had the great good fortune to meet Grandfather Martin Geschwesioma of Third Mesa. He passed away a few years ago, but he talked about this particular meaning of this petroglyph. And the lower one is the lower line on this petroglyph is the way that the world should be moving. Close to the earth, close to spirituality. Center and rooted. And it's, in particular, I was struck by the fact that this line continued along the side of the rock and kept on going, where the one above it, it represents the technological world that we're in right now, and estranged from the Creator, and estranged from what is real in your heart. The Hopi had make this distinction between one hearts and two hearts. If you have one heart, you're rooted along this lower line. But if you have two hearts, it's kind of like saying you're two-faced, or you're duplicitous, or you're kind of schizoid, like the old King Crimson song, 20th Century Schizoid Man. Mm-hmm. You're lured in by all this technology, and this is happening, on the reservation too. People have to go to Phoenix, and Flagstaff, and play urban areas in order to work. They come off the reservation, and they have to work. So there's always this stressful time we're in. The end of the fourth world. So I think we'll make it through. Mark.
Okay, well, good, because we only have about 30 seconds left, and I just want to thank you for being a guest.
Thank you,
check
Mark.
out
I
Gary
appreciate
Dave.
it. Barbara, you take care. You stay healthy, both of you. And hopefully
you too,
we can talk again sometime when it's not so crazy.
Okay, and Barbara wants to have you on. Hey, Barbara, you can wrap up the show. I'm done.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, I think both of you did an amazing job tonight, and certainly made me very curious, as well as a lot of other people. So we really do look forward to having you back on. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. Join us again tomorrow for Mary Joyce, and then again next Monday and Tuesday. Have a good evening, everybody. Good night.